Okay, we are reconvening public meeting 138, and at about 2 o'clock, and we will go straight to item number 7, workforce supplier and diversity development.
Good afternoon,
Good
Commissioners.
afternoon.
I'm here today to recommend that the Mass Gaming Commission establish an Access and Opportunity Committee, a formal committee established to monitor diversity compliance during construction for the Category 1 casino projects, and to make recommendations to advance the goals of inclusion. At the October 9th Commission meeting, the Policy Group on Tradeswomen's Issues highlighted the success of the UMass Integrated Science Complex project in achieving and surpassing their diversity goals. And they also highlighted the best practices that made that success possible. The establishment of an Access and Opportunity Committee was listed by Liz Skidmore of the New England Regional Council of Carpenters and Susan Moyer of UMass Boston Labor Resource Center as one of those best practices. And I might add that they are here today to offer their support. The establishment of an Access and Opportunity Committee was later endorsed by Mark Ehrlich of the New England Regional Council of Carpenters and Brian Doherty of the Building and Construction Trades Council. The establishment of an Access and Opportunity Committee is about bringing a higher degree of transparency of effort and accountability forward. In short, access and opportunity is about opening doors and removing barriers. The concept is that all stakeholders, casino licensees, construction managers or general contractors, subcontractors, unions, and community representatives, as well as the Commission, will work together to maximize diversity commitments and other related workforce and supplier commitments made in their applications and host and surrounding community agreements regarding resident, minority, female, and veteran workforce participation across the projects. Furthermore, stakeholders will also promote full business participation from minority business enterprises, women business enterprises, and veteran business enterprises. Collaboration and transparency among all these parties is critical to the success and attainment of these goals. The Access and Opportunity Committee will bring a focus on the end goals of providing opportunity to the diverse population of the Commonwealth to work and do business with the casinos. You know, I have described the membership, potential membership of the committee in the document before you. Maybe I'll review that in a few minutes, but maybe I'll talk about the duties of the Access and Opportunity Committee would involve reviewing detailed statistical reports regarding the number, gender, race, and veteran status of the individuals by job classifications hired to perform labor as part of the construction of the gaming establishment, and reports regarding supplier diversity as well. The committee would recommend actions that can be taken to increase the level of minority business enterprise or women or veteran business participation as subcontractors. And they could also make recommendations to increase the number and percentage of women, minority, and veteran individuals participating as labor as well. And I should also note that both WIN and MGM have expressed support and agreed to participate in this Access and Opportunity Committee. How would this work? You know, the logistics were something that we thought long and hard about. The proposal is that the committee would meet at a minimum every other month, once in Boston, following a meeting in Springfield. We would, so in addition to alternating the meeting between the two cities, we would utilize technology like Skype to ensure access, open access. And based on actually recent feedback from one of the licensees, we do think there's a need to have local subcommittees that make up the community groups and some of the local participation. So
Is that described in this?
it is a recent, it is not described in it. It's a recent recommendation and probably something that we would change about
Okay, yeah,
the
'cause-
document that you have.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. So also pending your approval, I've reached out to Ron Marlowe, who chaired the Division of Capital Asset Management in the UMass Building Authority Access and Opportunity Committee. By all accounts, from everyone who has participated, he's done a superb job in moving the discussion along and allowing people an opportunity to process the information. So he has agreed to participate pending your approval. So are there questions or discussion?
Commissioners?
I think it's a great idea. I read the memo. I'm sorry I missed the presentation when the women presented a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was, maybe a month ago now, right? I was unable to be here and missed that presentation. Jill, you filled me in though, and but no, this looks, you know, you've included everyone that seemed to be could be helpful on the committee. It seems like a win-win. It's not something that we're getting pushback about, and if people are willing to help, I think it's just it's a really good idea.
Mr. Chair, I think Jill's done a great job formulating this, and we all know this is a little bit different model than what was used for the UMass Boston project, because they were the actual purveyors of the building. We are merely kind of in a monitoring role. I guess the one question I had, you have several spots here set aside for people who are a member of the current administration, or could be appointed by members of the current administration. Maybe, Mr. Chairman, it gets to your point about, you know, some type of transition report that we're going to recommend in terms of making sure, would you see yourselves getting some people named here within the next month, or waiting until, you know, going into the following year with the swearing in of a new governor to figure out who some of these people might be? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't anticipate waiting for the transition. I'd like to get started and have the first meeting by the end of this year. And I think, quite honestly, that the positions or the people who would be involved in rolling up their sleeves, that transition may not happen until the spring. I mean, that's my own personal, and if there is transition, we'll work to get the new representatives up to speed. But I don't anticipate slowing down, you know, unless the commissioners think that that would be prudent. The one thing I did want to mention was that we did have, as a member of the committee, a proposed member, a representative from the surrounding community chosen by the local community mitigation advisory community. And that would be something we would request of them, ask them if they would like to send two representatives, one from each, one from Western Mass and one from Eastern Mass. So they wouldn't be required to do that, but we would request of them.
I know we have a little bit of flexibility from the commission standpoint of, you know, some additional faces and appointees, but I was very impressed with the gentleman you introduced us from Labor and Workforce Development, who focuses on apprenticeship opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think he and/or his successor would be a valuable addition to that. Just hearing again on the radio this morning the decline in the number of apprenticeship opportunities that are available to folks out there is something I think we want to keep focused on.
Yeah. So you're speaking, I think, of David Wallace, the Deputy Director of Apprenticeship Training, and he was a participant in the UMass Building Authority Access and Opportunity Committee. I think he would add quite a bit as well.
Okay, good.
So,
I have a technical question. Would
Yes.
this be, would this committee be required to have a quorum? I know it would be subject to the open meeting, which is great, and there'll be minutes, but a lot of the members here are, high level, or they're designees.
Yeah.
And you propose that it meet in Boston and Springfield,
Right.
which is a great idea. But what if you can only convene less than half of the members here?
yeah, we actually didn't put a requirement of a quorum, and thought that should be left up to the discretion of the commission.
Okay,
The commission or the committee?
Or the committee, rather.
committee.
yes.
The committee, sorry.
I have a sort of a big picture question. That is, what are we gaining by this? We have a carefully, we're paying a monitor who makes reports to us. Part of the reporting that we require from the licensees is diversity. We've got a diversity plan that's for Penn National, and I assume for MGM and for WIN, we will have a diversity plan that's gone through a lot of vetting that we ultimately approve. And then we require periodic reports from them to see how they're doing, and happily, with respect to Penn National, they're way ahead of goals and the like. We've got remedial provisions in that plan if they fall below the goals, and the numbers dictate whether they're above or below. At least the first four bullets are already represented in that process. And one of the duties of this committee is to, in Section 3A, to review quarterly status reports submitted to the Commission reflecting the progress of construction and certifying compliance with the approved project schedule for major stages of construction. We're already doing that through the PINC folks and the PMA folks. The goal here is something everybody's got their back behind. But I'm just worried, I'm just interested in why this isn't a redundancy, in essence, of something that we're already doing that actually may make achieving things more complicated, achieving results both in terms of actual construction progress
Yeah.
and in terms of the highly desirable goal of diversity more cumbersome.
I think you've raised some interesting and very good questions. So in the case of the Plainville, the Category 2 casino project, the scale is quite different. There was an existing building, an existing garage, and just the size was quite different. I think the massive scale of the resort casino projects, the length of the construction, the pace of the construction. In one case, there will be over 4,000 construction workers required over the length of the project. There will be other public sector projects going on at the same time. And I think that this offers another mechanism to ensure diversity, and more importantly, to ensure transparency in the process as well.
And if I could add, let's talk about the Penn project. They haven't met their goals when it comes to women, okay? They're trying, and I believe they are making good faith efforts. But having others who really have studied this issue and are willing to help, I think is just a tremendous opportunity that we would be providing. It was apparent to me by listening to the union folks that they're just starting. They don't really track, so outside help, I think, would really be a benefit. I see, and I know that in the world that I come from, policing, outside help really, really helps. You can have a great plan, you can make internal efforts and say you're trying, but the numbers don't change without others in the community helping you. That's my experience, so I think this is a very good idea.
What responsibility under 3A would this committee have for certifying compliance with the approved project schedule for major stages of construction? And what would happen if they didn't certify compliance with the approved project schedule? That by itself doesn't seem to have anything to do with diversity. It seems to have something to do with whether the progress is as the commission has approved it.
That's actually a really good point. I think progress in relation to diversity, so maybe we could rephrase that, but I'm thinking one of the things that we've talked about with an applicant, for example, is, while they're working on a certain section of construction, making sure that they do outreach with the particular union that's involved in that stage of construction. So I think the certification you're talking about, maybe the word is too strong.
Well, the certification as to compliance with targets, or the certification with the approved diversity plan, because do we plan to go through the same process that we did with Penn and get a diversity plan and do all that? I take it that we do. Right.
Yes,
so
the licensees are working on that now.
And so certification with that plan in relation to the progress. I've already said what the major premise is. I'm worried about bureaucratizing this to the point of bureaucratizing a process to the point of the process itself being a hindrance to progress.
Yeah, I really think that that sentence should be compliance with the diversity plan, not the project schedule. We have ultimately, I know the intention that it should be at critical points, right? And major milestones and all of that, may go without saying, but it's not with compliance with the project schedule.
Okay.
I have some of the same concern. This feels to me, you said this is different from the one that took place for the building authority for UMass. And I think it's different in a lot of ways. My perception, Susan and Liz can maybe contribute to this, my perception of the way that committee worked was that it was really an advocate and what Susan referred to as a badass champion. My perception was this was the organization that was cutting through the BS and saying, hey, this is for real. Bring in your subcontractors and let me see the makeup of their core committee, of their core force. And that refused to take, I can't find any for an answer, and really put the heat on in a passionate way, the various players, and had the experience of knowing who the critical players were to be identified. not only A, but B and C are really just bureaucratic functions that we're going to take place, that we're going to be overseeing a lot of times. I secondly wondered whether, and you maybe you've addressed this, whether by making this a statewide committee, that we start to weaken its force. You know, this is going to be powerful when you've got people close in who really care about this, who have real knowledge about how construction hiring works and how do you mainstream folks into apprenticeship programs and so forth. And that by setting up this big statewide thing with all these people, half of whom will never show up, you might really undercut the bite that this organization had, that this committee had. So, you know, you have D&E says recommend actions that can be taken to increase the level of either vendors or individuals. And those are the ones that, you know, those are the two things that I see this committee is really being about. Yeah, you're going to look at the reports, but we don't need any more people, you know, telling us whether the reports are right or not. And this organization would not be saying, have you met your diversity goals, but have you exceeded your diversity goals? And why is your diversity goal only 12? It should be 18, you know? So that's my perception of the way the committee worked. A,
Chairman
is that
Crosby?
accurate? And B, if it is, does that build on what Commissioner McHugh is talking about, that maybe this is structured as too much of a bureaucratic function and not a real gritty, down and dirty, roll up your sleeves, moves the needle organization?
So I think your characterization is correct in terms of how the committee functioned. I would say that I used the rules of procedure from that group to create Mass Gaming Commission's access and opportunity committees, and it mirrors it except for I did add some of the regular reports that we would be getting by regulation from our licensees, and I thought it would be worth sharing those with this group. But for example, the membership is the same, actually. The state representatives were also representatives in the UMass committee. I think what maybe we need to add to this is the local badass champions that you refer to. The difference is that this is not just one project, it's two, so we'll have two local subcommittees, and I've talked to some of the local folks, and they're eager to participate. We'll have also, in some cases, different unions that will be participating, so there will need to be probably subcommittees in Springfield and Everett.
I think the flexibility we're going to have in naming a lot of local folks, and I wouldn't suggest that their official title be local badass, but
Maybe just LBA.
doing business as.
Yeah, LBA, right.
But I think it gets your goal, Mr. Chairman, of it's probably understated here, you know, our ability to add local people. You know, we've talked about this with the community college workforce folks. So it's great to have this group working up here, but it's really the folks who are around the table who know the neighborhoods, who know the grassroots, and know the organizations that can help drive people to participate in the process or pursue those construction careers. In this case, I feel comfortable that's covered.
Right, and we didn't want to make it too prescriptive, but we have been getting to know some of those local folks who have developed an amazing amount of expertise in monitoring and giving advice and suggestions regarding increasing diversity during construction.
Well, if this body were empowered to really support the local groups, you know, and to be help the local groups, you know, give them resources, make sure they get attention, and make sure they were doing their real on-the-ground work, that would make some sense. But I do sort of feel like, as Bruce is saying, that I think it's going to be the people from the area who are going to know where the bodies are buried and know how to actually make some change here. Did Liz and Susan's, I know obviously they were a part of this. How do you guys feel? Do you want to come up here for a second
Want to come up
and
to
talk
the
about
mic?
this? This was the team that presented.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed it.
Yeah, grab those.
Good morning.
Good morning, or afternoon.
First thing I said to Jill this morning was I apologize because at the last meeting, I kind of jumped her and said, oh, I think you have to have 4 committees. And she was, of course, a little panicked.
One for each location?
One for each location.
Okay,
And I think the dilemma you're facing, we're all looking at, you've moved very fast on this, and you're way ahead of where we've ever been before. So we're all kind of catching up. We don't want you to slow down. We want you to keep moving fast on it. But I think there are some questions that we haven't quite answered. So the example I used with Jill this morning is, so UMass Boston is, I think it's 5 projects right now, all of them much smaller than yours, and all of them on the same campus. We have a single access and opportunities committee. It does involve 2 different agencies, DCAM and UMBA. So there's been all kinds of kind of bureaucratic and jurisdictional and governance issues. But the on-site event, which happens there and also was modeled on what happened at the Kroc Center in Dorchester, which was the very small project where all of these best practices were essentially kind of birthed, is called the trailer meeting. At UMass Boston, that happens once a week. And that's a group that looks like in more detail about what's actually happening on the site. I would say, Commissioner McHugh, that I'm kind of jumping around, but about your concerns. So I don't think we have a great answer about that. I will say there are many official members of the Access and Opportunities Committee, and you're absolutely right. Most of them don't show up because they're official members. But the group itself has been highly functioning, and I think maybe Liz can talk a little bit more about that. Commissioner McHugh, I would say in response to your concerns that I think this has brought great efficiency to the goals. I think when we say these are proven strategies, it has not been, I don't think anybody who's been involved in this process at UMass Boston, now it's developing, a similar process is developing in the Dudley Square area around development there, that it has been very efficient because it has been a single funnel through which the diversity problems have been addressed. Otherwise, the diversity problems, and I would contend without something like this, you will only have diversity problems, you will not have diversity solutions. Because the institutional at government, industry, labor, and every other level in construction, resistance to this process is so well established. Everyone is really clear. We've had these goals for 35 years. And for 35 years, we've been developing institutional structures to resist the goals. Now, we really are at a place where we're all committed to doing something different. But we need a mechanism. I think Ron Marlowe, one of the things that, I feel like Ron was great at, was building trust among parties with a singular vision, but very different roles in this. So that's the efficiency that's built in here, is that kind of trust building, relationship building, and as you said, Commissioner Crosby, really identifying where the expertise is to get past those institutionalized problems. You want to say a little bit about how the committees actually function? Or whatever you would like to say, actually? Let me not ask the leading question. I'm watching too much Good Wife.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you all again. And we're very, very excited about this. And I will say partners all around the country are very, very excited about this and inspired by what you're considering doing here and are already using it as a model for other developments in other parts of the country. So thank you for taking this as seriously as you are. I think seems like at least two questions on the table. One is this committee redundant to what your subcontractor is doing? And then should there be one committee per project or statewide? I think on the redundancy question, I agree with Susan, and I will just say there is no subcontractor, how fabulous that subcontractor is, that could do this alone. They just can't, and for all the reasons you said, you need local partners, you need labor in the room, you need the people who actually deal with apprentices, bring them in, who actually know their workforce and who know the community. So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece of it is having everyone in the room keeps everyone honest, which is, I think, what Commissioner Cameron was talking about, is it's easy to get comfortable, and a little bit of discomfort around this stuff actually makes it move forward, because everyone's keeping track of what each other is doing. I think, I can't speak to whether or not there should be a regional committee. I can see the value to that, or a statewide committee. I agree with the comments that have been made about needing a committee that's tied to each project for all the reasons that you said. So I think at minimum you need a committee per project, and then perhaps some regional, less often, something or other that meet, so that, because I do suspect you're going to develop expertise that on one job that might be construction schedule a little bit ahead of the next job that would be useful to one of the second project, and likewise to the third. And I will slightly disagree with Susan, which we do sometimes. The UMass Boston Access and Opportunity, actually, a lot of the key stakeholders did attend all the meetings. The commissioner of DCAM was there almost every single meeting.
Really?
And whenever things started to stray, she made it very clear that failure was not an option, and that the governor and the whole state agency was taking this very seriously, and it was very important. So she was there at almost every meeting. Ron Marlowe was there at almost every meeting. Top executives from each of the general contractors were there at almost every meeting, and I think that participation by leadership has been one of the things that made this successful, versus some compliance projects where there's a compliance person who's a relatively low person within that contractor hierarchy, and they don't have any authority to really do anything. They can kind of give reports, but they can't sort of force the envelope at all. So I think a piece of what made the UMass Access and Opportunity Committee successful is there was participation from senior level leadership, both on the government side and on the contractor side. And I guess the developer side, sort of as relates to what we're talking about here.
A single subcontractor or contractor compliance officer is we have seen as one of the most high-risk jobs in this field. We've seen 3 people fired in the last 6 months. If the contractor feels like, or subcontractor feels like this is interfering with profit, progress, or their own political views, they just fire the compliance person. It does require that kind of leadership at the top to really make this. And I think, I'm a defender of subcontractors. I think, for your benefit, Commissioner Cameron, I said in my testimony, subcontractors are the ones who do the hiring. They will do the diversity hiring, and they are the most economically vulnerable sector of this industry. They have very few incentives to do this. So it takes those who are above, and I don't like to think of the unions as below, but the labor suppliers also. It really takes it truly takes a multidimensional strategy in order to make this successful.
Well, I can understand that, and by my questions, I wasn't suggesting that somehow you put compliance solely in the hands of a subcontractor to the person who's supposed to be, whose performance is supposed to be reviewed. That doesn't make any sense at all. I agree with you, and I was intrigued by your talk about the weekly meetings in the trailer, but a group of this size and a group with this kind of a charge just concerns me about its efficiency. I mean, you put a lot of emphasis on efficiency, and I think to be effective, this has to be efficient. I'm fully supportive of the goal. I just and something that was efficient, something that was at a high level, something that neither the prime contractor nor the subcontractors had control over, something that had buy-in from the owner and from the commission. I think all of that is something I could enthusiastically support, but I don't see that here. And so it's not the goal, it is this construct that I'm having difficulty with.
I think, I agree with that, and I think that, in a way, the issue of should there be one or two, I think there's a clear sense that there needs to be local organizations. Does there also need to be an overarching one? I don't know about that. But I think what's wrong here is the duties and responsibilities of the committee, which is what Commissioner McHugh picked up on right on the bat. The things that you talked about the commission did, the weekly meetings, the implementing the best practices that you guys have designed, making sure there's a little discomfort in the room, that's not mentioned here, but that's what that committee was supposed to do. And if the duties and responsibilities were to assure implementation of the best practices put together, by the organization, and to, advocate for increased goals and stuff like that, and then it was a workable, on-the-ground group, that feels more appropriate to me.
Can I,
You're gonna need to get these reports so you can see what the data is, but that's got nothing, that's not really your job. That's just a tool to get you geared up to do your job.
Okay.
I don't mean this as a really in the weeds question, and it's going to come across as one, but bear with me. I know, where it says here in A, just what Commissioner McHugh was talking about, section 3A, that the committee would certify compliance with the approved project schedule. Is that generally, or was that generally the idea that if a committee like this does not see progress or good faith efforts, there would be some kind of stop until there is such? You cannot go forward if you have not if you're not about to meet those goals? Is that part of the idea?
So actually, this was brought from one of our regulations, our construction monitoring regulations, and that was not part of the UMass building. And I think you're right. I agree that maybe that is not the correct role of this committee.
Okay, well, let me elevate that question. So what would be a realistic hammer or carrot or whatever, the combination of both that would come to be when any of the parties of this committee felt that there were either no good faith efforts or no achieving of those goals?
I can start to answer or a piece of that. I think one of the models for this is New Haven, Connecticut. They have had one of the most successful workforce hiring goals in the country. And what they do is make it phenomenally clear from the first second you're in contact with any of the projects that are covered by this, that this is critical. So it's repeated. There's a pre-job meeting for every subcontractor specifically and exclusively on this subject. It's not one of 20 items on a pre-job to do with what style windows are you buying and everything else. So they have a separate pre-job agreement. It's very, very clearly delineated in even the bid documents, which is one of our recommendations in the best practices. They do have a fine structure. If you miss the pre-job meeting, it's $1,000. If you do this, it's this one. And that's one of the pieces of paper they get from the beginning. Their goal is to provide the contractors enough support to be that contractor is successful. And they, get a few efforts that help with being success. So I think that we all want to create a wide pathway for people to be successful and not have to deal with, the stick. I think in terms of the carrot, one of our recommendations is that past practice at meeting workforce goals is one of the things that's evaluated when subcontractors are chosen.
I remember these are some of the recommendations.
Right, and I think that the more we can get that into industry practice, that becomes a self-fulfilling process that will sort of provide that financial incentive for subcontractors to take this on, because it means they'll get more work. And then I do think you're right. I think that some stick is critical. And there's possibilities for fines, there's possibilities for stopping payment, there's possibilities for sort of compliance review meetings, kind of in reverse strength. So I think, yes, I certainly would advise having consequences. A wide, clear, well-advertised path to success, and then consequences if you don't.
So I think that, I don't think I'm disagreeing with you at this point. We would not recommend you put that in this document. But I think what we would recommend you put in this document, that this committee can explore possible options for sanctions. That should be one of the roles of this committee. Sanctions are not being used yet. Sanctions are going to have to be put in place. Someone's going to have to be the first one to the table with that. You have an opportunity, if you've made it crystal clear, if it's obviously a wide pathway. We have talked, I think we talked here, or maybe it was at another meeting, about we have a tremendous amount of data now. We can identify bad actors. Your licensees can hire a bad actor, but if they have, how will that bad actor's acting improve? One other thing I wanted to pick up on that Liz mentioned is, or someone actually from the panel, we don't use best faith efforts. Best faith efforts are actually the mechanism that has been used for 35 years to evade these goals. We say maximum efforts, and we describe what those maximum efforts are, including one critical thing that I think Ron Marlowe is an expert on this. It took maybe a year and a half in the Access and Opportunities Committee to tease out and discern who's lying when a subcontractor says, I called the hall, I asked for women, they don't have any. Because actually maximum efforts require the documentation of the ask and the response. The numbers of women skyrocketed on those sites where people asked for written documentation of the ask and the response. So that's maximum efforts. That's not best faith efforts are, I told you, I asked for them, they didn't have any. That's never worked. So those kinds of, again, what you're saying yourself, that kind of previous experience and knowledge that we've gathered, we're hoping, however you constitute your AOC, that's our PGTI model. Put a lot of people in the room, the Policy Group on Trades Initiative, put a lot of people in the room, they have a lot of different experiences on this, build faith and trust, and turn that varied experience into collective knowledge to make change. We don't really care how you do it bureaucratically, as long as really that's how you see the role of this committee.
And I think at least my overall thought on, it's why we're calling it Access and Opportunity as opposed to watchdog and hit you with a stick committee, is to focus on engaging best practices. We've always talked about we don't want to set our licensees up for failure, but understanding that we have one licensee who hasn't named a GC yet, so we don't know where that GC may be coming from, what their familiarity is with the area. Don't tell. So the Access and Opportunity Committee is really to make sure that we're helping our licensees meet their goals, or the goals that they've prescribed in their application, and that we're trying to help them to meet. I just want to go back, because we've talked about it on Section 3A, and we've already talked about rewriting it, but I read that a little bit differently, not necessarily suggesting that the committee do any certifying compliance. As I reread it, it said she'll review the quarterly status reports reflecting the progress of construction certifying compliance. I read that as the reports certify the compliance, not the committee itself, but maybe I was just reviewing it wrong over the past few weeks. But
Can I make 2 additional comments? Quarterly's not enough. Construction moves too fast. By the time
I'm sorry, I
you
didn't
do-
hear what you said.
Quarterly's not often
Oh,
enough.
right.
Construction moves too fast. Quarterly reports are way out of date. At UMass, we began by doing monthly. We moved to every other month. Monthly certainly would have been more effective. We lost ground when we moved to
I thought you said the trailer group was weekly.
The trailer group, yes, the trailer group is looking weekly. Yes, that is true.
Oh.
Great, let's look weekly. Great idea, Commissioner.
All right.
The other thing I wanted to mention was something you mentioned, Commissioner Crosby, is that if I had to pick the one most critical thing here is that your subcontractors and your contractors, your licensees, were all on board with the goals are actually floors. We actually want this to be true every single day. And, you know, we've worked a long time with Turner. We have really good relationships with folks. And they are continuing to have this problem of getting their subs. Every day, you need, whatever we agree on, 6.9%, 10% women, 6.9 has got to be your floor. You come on to this job with women on your crew. And then, you know, your numbers will start at a good place and you'll be going up from there.
Well, you persuasively told us about that before, and then that was echoed by the union representatives who we had before, who enthusiastically spoke about the same thing. But let's come back to the trailer group for a second. Everybody in 2A didn't meet in the trailer, did they?
No.
It was going to have to be the biggest trailer in
They did have big trailers.
So if you
Trailer
had
park.
yeah. So you had a large committee, then you had a trailer group, which was sort of an action committee, right? Or an action group.
So the large committee was the commissioner of DCAM, the commissioner of UMBA, Ron Marlowe, folks from each of those two agencies, the general
20 people on that committee, that's what I said.
contractors involved, community folks, labor folks, et cetera, et cetera. The weekly committee was led by the compliance person for DCAM, who was a tremendous powerhouse, Mukia Baker Gomez, and representative from the general contractor who was actually doing the on-site walk-on log and doing the daily compliance. Because, I mean, don't be fooled. Every contractor knows every day exactly how many people are on that job.
I understand.
And then, so the weekly group was a much smaller group.
Okay.
And that was much more of a working group, writing things, editing things, designing. You know, they had the best walk-on log system for walk-on applicants that I've seen anywhere in the country. And that group worked all the kinks out and actually produced the documents and the tracking system for that. So you're right, the weekly group was a much smaller group.
So
And DCAM was in effect the owner of those projects, right?
At the Integrated Science Center, and then UMBA was
Right,
the owner
so
of the other three
You
projects.
could substitute owner's representative for DCAM if you wanted to generalize it.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know whether that, I mean, that sounds to me like a workable, sensible, effective kind of thing
So if I could just clarify, the DCAM UMBA group had 17 people and 12 organizations.
Right.
I think our working committee will develop, or our trailer, you know, I think we have this model where we have we've engaged a construction monitor. You know, in the case of Penn National, they are on the site most days. So we have kind of a more flexible, I think we will also have local folks involved, and we'll have the flexibility to call people together more often than every other month if needed. I don't know that would be needed all the time, though. So that's...
I guess where I'm coming to is I'd be much more comfortable with this document if it had a structure like that was more easily discernible.
Okay,
Right.
okay. That's fair.
And maybe it's the local committees that you said you're starting to add, but I think you get a clear sense, everybody thinks that's
Yes,
pretty
I think
important.
that's a great...
And so the two takeaways I would suggest, one is what Commissioner McHugh just said, and the second would be to put less of the report-getting bureaucratic stuff and more of the real meat and potatoes of implementing best practices, et cetera,
Okay.
in the role. So for those committees.
And it's just listed, these things are important, A, B, and C, in order to make the proper recommendations.
Right.
So those are the tools needed
Right.
for the group to have access to that information in order to make those recommendations, which really is the key here. And if people are serious about this, they will welcome this. They want to do it better, they will welcome this help, because they don't have the ability on their own to do it better. They just don't. So,
Right.
you know, I just
And
think...
it does appear that we have support from all parties. I mean,
Yes.
that was really pleasing. Our licensees, the unions, the community groups are all on board, so.
Can I ask one more question? Because I'm not sure if the document, and I just think this will, transparency for the sake of transparency. I think this document should say that compliance data will be online and public. And, you know, that should be
Good idea.
part of this committee, is to make that happen and sell it and use it.
Yeah. I think
Good
it
idea.
probably already is, but this is a good place to emphasize that.
No, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
When you talk about a stick, and I know that that's not the goal here at all, to use a stick, but I would not want to come before this commission with poor numbers and having not paid attention to this committee and followed recommendations.
Right.
I would agree
What are
with
you
that.
going to do to them?
Well, one thing that comes to mind, every subcontractor has to be registered with this commission, right? Has to be a registrant.
That's
depending on
actually not
the-
the case.
Depending on the level of activity,
Oh, yeah.
right?
There are a lot of things the commission can do. I mean,
And just the
if you
public
know-
exposure is really, for example, I mean, I know I get back to
Could I just
policing, but-
clarify, I'm sorry, subcontractors need to be identified, subcontractors need to
Registered,
be
yes.
identified. So subcontractors to Gilbane fill out an information form?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. They have to be registered. Not registered?
Not
They
registered.
don't have to be registered?
They don't have to be registered. They fill out an information form. They need to be identified by, for example, Gilbane is the,
Okay.
yeah,
Either way, we will know what they are in advance.
okay, yes.
And if they know the bad actors, then bingo.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's maybe that's part of the role.
It's part of the
Review lists,
conversation.
The review
subcontractor
prior
lists
to
for
them
bad
showing
actors.
up.
Or at least, I mean, bad actors can get better, but at least
Yeah.
if we know
They can.
people who are good and bad, at least if you've got people whose track records are bad, you bring them in advance and you tell them what the rules are. You give them a shot, doesn't mean you kick them out completely, but at least you know you got to give them special attention.
And I'm actually encouraged in talking with some of these construction managers. They have internal controls and procedures that, as well as diversity goals as well. But it appears they have consequences. So that's a good thing.
Great. Thank you, guys, very much for
Thank you.
your
Thank you very much.
continued help on this.
Commissioners, just a procedural question. Is this something you would want to put out for public comment or at all?
I think it merits a little bit more editing. Perhaps we could do a little bit of that in the next,
Yeah,
think-
not,
Week or
if you're talking
two.
about this draft, I would not put that out.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, I mean, I think,
But the revision,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Director Griffin. We are
Yeah,
moving on.
that's very hopeful, and I look forward to the next draft, because I do think it's going to be a very useful and helpful tool.
so I'll be back.
All right,
Right.
we're moving to item number 8, Research and Problem Gambling, Mark Vander Linden, Director.
Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
Chairman and Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Is it getting dark, or is it just?
Yeah, it does feel like it's getting dark, yes.
Dark and rainy. And on that note, I'll bring you, my first agenda item is an update on the play management. So 2 weeks ago, you heard a report from Judith Glenn in Strategic Science on play management, the experience of play management, pre-commitment features, and a number of other jurisdictions. It also included a number of recommendations that she and her team of consultants provided to the commission on how to proceed with that. Originally, the plan would be that we would put that out for public comment for a week, and I would have come back to you today to provide a recommendation from me to you on how to proceed on this very important issue. It is a very important issue, and we heard from specifically our licensees that they wanted an opportunity to more fully address this issue. And I think that that is actually very important. We want, and have all along, wanted all voices to be heard, not just on the play management features, but all of the responsible gaming measures specifically identified in the responsible gaming framework. So kind of in that same spirit, we have made that accommodation, extended the public comment period to November 13th, so 1 week from today, so extended it a week, and allowed time on the commission agenda for 2 weeks from now to hear from the licensees on what their perspective is specifically on play management features. So a week from now, we should have those comments in writing. 2 weeks from now at the commission meeting, we will hear from our licensees. They will provide verbal testimony or verbal statement about where they're coming from on this issue. The meeting after that point on 12/4, I'll take into consideration all the testimony that we've received, all the written testimony that came in through the MGC website, and I will at that point then make a recommendation to the commission. At least that's the plan at this point. So with that, is there any questions or comments on that plan?
And maybe other information from Judith that she's trying to work on too.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So next on our agenda, I'm here with Dr. Volberg. Amanda Haupt, who was originally on the agenda, is not feeling well. She's ill and wasn't able to make the trek into Boston today. But Dr. Volberg is going to kind of hold down this part of the presentation. What she's going to talk about focuses specifically on the gambling impact cohort, but also tying that back to how does this differ from, in the important ways, from SIGMA, the social and economic impacts of gaming in Massachusetts, and what we hope to learn from specifically a cohort study on gambling behavior. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Volberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Nice to be back in Boston. Although I must say the ride in through the rain was a bit harrowing. So I've come before you several times over the past year and a half to talk about the social and economic impacts of gambling in Massachusetts, the big study that we've been carrying out. But today I'm here to talk to you about the Massachusetts Gambling Impact Cohort Study. We like to call it MAGIC. So before I give you an overview of the cohort study's components, I thought it would be helpful and important to define some key terms. There are several ways in which the MAGIC study differs from SIGMA that we've been implementing over the past year and a half. There are differences both in what we hope to learn from each study as well as in the research methods that we plan to use to carry the two studies out. To begin with, one of the major ways that the two studies differ is in their overall design. SIGMA is a repeat cross-sectional study. And what that means is that we are using two large surveys. One, as you know, was in the field for quite a long time, starting in September 2013. Before the casinos opened, we got a good, clean baseline survey of gambling behavior in Massachusetts. The second survey, the repeat cross-sectional survey, is going to take place after the casinos have all been open for about a year. The two surveys draw different samples of people from the population. And so we're going to, rather than collecting data from the same people over time, the repeat cross-sectional is basically two snapshots, one before casinos and one after casinos. The magic, the longitudinal cohort study, is rather different in that instead of taking two snapshots of the population, we're going to take a cohort or a group in the population, and we'll be collecting a kind of moving picture of them, taking snapshots, but of the same people as time passes. So one of the words that people struggle with, the next slide, is this word etiology. And I remember when I read the Expanded Gaming Act for the first time after it was finally published and passed, I was thrilled to see the word etiology actually included in Section 71, because what that meant was that Massachusetts was going to have to do a cohort study. That's what you have to do to be able to understand what causes a particular condition, and in this case, problem gambling. So because we're going to be collecting data from the same group of people over time, we're going to be able to look at changes in those individuals over time, changes in their gambling behavior, changes in their problem gambling status, changes in whether they have co-occurring disorders, whether those come ahead of or after or concurrent with a gambling problem. And by observing how these new cases of the condition emerge and progress, intensify, remit, relapse, however they change, we're going to learn a great deal about the causes of problem gambling, and in public health terms, about the risk and protective factors. And the reason that's important is because knowing the risk and protective factors is really the foundation for being able to build effective interventions. And because magic will tell us a lot about how gambling problems develop over time, that's going to be the information that you need to structure the types of services that are put in place, where they're put in place, and what the balance is between, say, treatment and public education and other more sort of education and awareness raising activities. Next slide. These are a couple of other important terms in the public health realm that many people find difficult to sort of get their heads around. But the type of information the main type of information that's going to come out of the two studies, on the one hand, SIGMA is going to yield data that lets us calculate the prevalence of problem gambling in Massachusetts, pre-casinos and then post-casinos. This means that we can use SIGMA to identify the number of existing cases in Massachusetts. We'll know how many people at that point in time, i.e. before the casinos, have a gambling problem. We'll have a somewhat better or good idea of how many of those people either are interested in seeking services or have sought services, and whether that help has been effective. Magic, on the other hand, will give us incidence, and incidence is the number of new cases that arise in a particular period of time. In this case, we're going to be looking at it year over year, and that means we're going to learn about people in Massachusetts who go from not having a gambling problem to having one, and perhaps then subsequently to not having a gambling problem at some point later in time. And knowing these things is very useful for intervention and treatment. knowing both things. Knowing about prevalence gives us a sense of the existing burden that we may have on the treatment system that we currently have. Knowing incidence gives us information about how new problem gamblers develop and what kinds of services might be most helpful to those different types of people in order to keep them from progressing further towards more difficulties. So the next slide, okay. This is an image that we use a lot in public health to help our students understand the difference between incidence and prevalence. So I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. Incidence, in this case, the number of new problem gamblers, but it can be any kind of disorder. Incidence is represented by the drops of water flowing into the bathtub. And prevalence is the water that you have in the bathtub. Now, if you think about it, it's like, okay, there's already the water that was in the bathtub that's being joined by the water that's falling into the tub. And in the same way, prevalence includes both new and existing problem gamblers. When you take that snapshot, you've got people who've recently developed a problem and people who've had a problem for a long period of time. And it's a little difficult to distinguish them one from the other, but they actually are somewhat different types of people. And we can talk about that in a minute. So the illustration also shows water flowing out of the tub. I mean, everybody wants a bathtub that's got a drain, right? And the water that is leaving the bathtub, or the people that are leaving the population of problem gamblers, that can happen for a number of different reasons. They can have recovered on their own, or they can have sought professional help and recovered with some help from a professional mental health or substance counselor. They could have moved out of the state. They could have been incarcerated or institutionalized, or sadly, sometimes they may have died. So prevalence can go up or down, just like the water in your bathtub, or it can stay the same, depending on the flow of water into the tub and the flow of water out of the tub. And I'm not going to go into the details of what can change the level, but one of the things it's important to remember that even if the prevalence is unchanged, if the water level stays the same, or potentially could even go down based on the removal of these cases, there's still a larger proportion of people in the population who may have recovered, but who will be vulnerable to a gambling problem in the future because of the fact that they have had a problem in the past. And that's a known risk factor for developing a gambling problem, is to have had one in the past. Okay, enough of the bathtub. So in the slides that follow, I want to just share with you some of the research questions that are going to be guiding our work and how we plan to apply the findings from MAGIC in assisting the Commission with helping people who might get into difficulties here. So there are two overarching aims to MAGIC. One is to determine the incidence of problem gambling in Massachusetts. Internationally, problem gambling prevalence has remained fairly constant over time. In some cases, it's reduced, and the assumption that's often made is, well, and it's a good thing if the prevalence goes down, but you don't always know exactly why the prevalence may have gone down. And as I just mentioned, it's possible that you've just created a much larger pool of people who are more vulnerable than they were before. So there's sort of two important possible explanations for why prevalence would stay stable or would go down. One is that there are ongoing problems in the same group of people. So you're not adding any new problem gamblers, but you're not removing any of them through treatment or having them recover. Or the rate of new cases is roughly equal to the rate of recovery and removal, so the level is staying the same, but it's actually the water is changing faster than you would think. And each of these explanations has different implications for prevention and treatment. In the first scenario, with lots of people who have had problems for a long time, you would want to commit more resources to treatment. In the second scenario, you would probably want to devote more resources to prevention and recovery support, because those would be the kinds of problem gamblers that you have in the population. The second goal of the cohort study is to develop a full etiological model of problem gambling. Now, there's a lot of research, some of which I've done, that has established correlates of problem gambling. That is, things that co-occur with problem gambling in a population survey taken at one point in time. But we know very little about whether these correlates develop concurrently with problem gambling, as a consequence of problem gambling, or whether they cause problem gambling. So as an example, we know that many problem gamblers also have clinical depression. And we don't know if the depression led them to gamble in ways that started giving them problems, if they are depressed because they have a gambling problem and it's a very depressing thing to have happen, or if they sort of have some third thing going on that caused both the depression and the problem gambling at the same time. And longitudinal research, or etiological research, is really the only way to sort of tease out those chicken and egg problems, which is why we're very excited about this particular study. So, next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. This is sort of the detailed questions that emerge from these two sort of overarching aims of the project, the question of incidence and the question of etiology. The one point that I do want to make is that the second wave of magic, we actually already have the first wave in hand, because all of our respondents, as I'll show you in a minute, all of our respondents for magic are going to be drawn from our general population survey. So we actually already have a full set of measures on all of these people. By completing the second wave of magic prior to any venue opening in Massachusetts, this is going to give us 2 measurement points needed to establish the natural incidence, or the incidence without expanded gaming, prior to the opening of any casinos in the state.
Rachel.
Subsequent waves of magic will occur after the casinos open. Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
so there's a second sampling that you intend to do for, prior to the opening of casinos?
Yes, so we're proposing, and I'll get there in a minute, we're proposing to go into the field in January with with our first wave of magic, well, our first wave under the magic project that will actually be the second wave of data collection with this group of people.
The same sample that we already have from Sigma,
Right, we're taking a
subsample
from there.
from Sigma, and
Yes.
as the first wave of magic.
Yes, but
So-
it's going to give us 2 pre-venue opening measures, so that we'll have an incidence rate that is people who changed from being non-problem gamblers to problem gamblers. That rate is going to be before casinos open in Massachusetts.
If I could use an analogy that you've used in the past, you know, the difference between 2 pictures and a movie. A movie is also made up of pictures, essentially, right? So you'll begin the movie by the first couple of pictures. Is
Yes,
that
that's
a
correct.
first statement?
Yes, and then we're going to look for changes in the pictures after the casinos open, or as the casinos open and after they open, with this same group of people, to see what happens to them
Fair
over
enough.
time.
When did the Sigma sample come completely out of the field?
I want to say May 31st
Right.
this year.
So that will mean some of your sample will only have been, only be 6 months or 7 months.
Yes.
Could
that-
you, couldn't you do it later than January? I don't know how long it will take, but couldn't you do it, I mean, the first casino won't open until June. Couldn't you do it much later in the spring, or in order to give people, almost everybody would have a full year or more?
Well, I'm a little reluctant to get as far down in the weeds as that question goes, but what we're going to do is we're going to look at each of the individuals that we draw for this sample. We're going to look at the date on which they completed their interview.
Right.
And my feeling is, although I have to check this with a number of my colleagues and co-investigators, my feeling is that we want to get as close to a year between the two assessments as possible, because we're asking people about the past year of behavior, and you're trying to have as
Right,
little
I get you.
overlap as
Right.
possible.
That's what I was getting at too. So you're already planning, anybody that you've had 12 months, you can
Yeah,
start
we
ASAP.
started in September.
Right, so you're gonna have-
It was a very long field work period.
They released in batches, you'll
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
13, yeah. So our original plan was to start data collection for Magic in September of 2014, but of course, we had to wait
Right.
until we knew whether we were going to have
Until
a
today.
study at all.
Till today, yeah. Yeah, I'd forgotten that consequence of having to delay it. That's too bad.
And these individuals obviously have to be willing to participate.
Yes, and fortunately, we at the end of the interview that we did with each of our close to 10,000 folks in the baseline survey, we asked about their willingness to be recontacted to participate in another survey or another study, and 90% or so of them said yes.
That's a
So-
very high number, right?
Yes, it is. It's called an opt-out system rather than an opt-in system of gaining consent.
Great.
Okay, this says don't read this. So I will move right along. In terms of the next slide, on etiology, the second set of questions relates to our second important goal of creating an etiological model for problem gambling. So when we think about predictive variables that predict someone moving into problem gambling, this includes individual characteristics, but also things like people's attitudes, casino proximity, advertising, media coverage. There's a lot of things that we're going to be tracking in addition to these individuals. We're also very interested in variables that predict recovery from problem gambling, because there's very good evidence that many people recover on their own or with less than formal professional treatment. And we're interested in finding out what those dynamics might be. All of this, as I said, is going to be very useful in efforts to optimize prevention and treatment services for problem gamblers in Massachusetts. One very interesting area that we are looking forward to exploring is to look at whether there are safe levels of gambling involvement, similar to guidelines that have been developed for safe consumption of alcohol, safe limits, and they're different for women than for men. Whether these could be used to create guidelines similar to those that have been created for alcohol, use those for gambling.
Would that, by the way, have to include relative wealth and income,
Yes.
I would imagine?
Yeah, so there's some work that's been done in Canada on safe gambling guidelines, and Rob Williams, my Canadian colleague, is very familiar with that work. I think we're going to be looking at a broader array of factors than they actually looked at with the data that they had in Canada.
Great.
Why have you chosen safe levels rather than unsafe levels to look for?
I had a response to that, Commissioner.
I raised it 2 weeks ago.
So In terms of the question of safe levels, what we're looking for is what is the level of involvement that a person can have with gambling that is not going to tip them over, so before they sort of tip over into having difficulties. We're looking for, you know, the amount of time that someone spends gambling or the amount of money that someone spends gambling. We want to identify the indicators that are not just most reliable, but also sort of easiest for people to remember. In the same way that, you know, it took a long time for alcohol research to get to the point where they were like, you know, any drinking at all is they sort of went from, you know, if you have an alcohol problem, you must be abstinent for the rest of your life, which was really difficult for a lot of people, to sort of saying, well, if you're going to drink, at least drink, you know, don't drink beyond a level that's not safe. And I think we're sort of trying to get there, we're hoping to get there with gambling as well.
But depending on what it is you're looking for, the inability to find it has different consequences, right? If you're looking for a safe level and you can't find a safe level demonstrably, then it is fair to conclude from your effort that there is no discernible safe level, i.e. all of whatever behavior it is unsafe.
Right.
Conversely,
so for tobacco,
well,
for example.
yes, and this was at the heart of the tobacco
Right.
problem and delayed.
Right.
Conversely, if you're looking for an unsafe level and you can't find it, you are left with the consequence that there is no discernible unsafe level. Therefore, everything is not demonstrably. I mean, people extrapolate that and say everything is therefore safe. So that choice, it seems to me, is a major choice in trying to figure out what the target is and why.
I'm not getting something. It doesn't, I would have thought that the major problem, the major challenge with finding either safe or unsafe levels is the idiosyncrasy of all individuals. You know, some people can gamble a lot, some people can't. Some people can spend a lot of time on a machine, some people can't. What you're going to look for, as I understand, is are there generalizable principles that can be applied, you know, basically completely across the universe of gamblers. And I would have thought it isn't, if you can't find one, it's unsafe for everybody. The question is, I would think it's more likely that you won't be able to find generalizable principles because it depends. And that doesn't mean there's no level of gambling that's safe. It just means you can't come up with a standard that can be applied across all people.
Yeah, in fact, my concern is more around, you know, the different gambling formats, and that there may be different guidelines, or there may be different sort of recommendations that you would want to make based on people's lottery participation versus, you know, online gambling versus, you know, playing table games or slot machines at a casino. It's a very intriguing effort, but I have to say that it's only one of the 4 questions that we have. And I certainly think that going forward, it would be great to have Commissioner McHugh come out and work with us on figuring out exactly how we might be able to do the kind of identification that we're hopeful to do.
Well, I'd be happy to do that. I don't know what expertise, I have no expertise in this area, but I do know that of all the questions on this area, on this slide, the one that is most directly connected to a regulatory regime is that question. And I also am aware of, as we all are, that for years, the inability to demonstrate a connection between smoking and cancer retarded the effort to regulate cigarette consumption. Whereas if the burden of proof had been the other way around, you may have had different results earlier. And we are aware of a regulatory regime in Europe about genetically modified foods that puts that burden right on the other way around, with the consequence that there is a different regulatory regime. So I think it's a big question. I'm not sure I have the expertise to decide which choice there should be, but I do think that it has consequences, particularly for a regulatory approach. And I'd be happy to help think through, to the extent that I can be helpful, how that question should be approached without taking away from the difficulty of figuring out what the answer is because of idiosyncrasies, regardless of which of the two you choose.
Seminar in Amherst.
Well, maybe I ought to take it.
Or give it.
Rachel, can I ask you a question? Do you feel like kind of the alternative unsafe levels of gambling has been better defined just through science, through research, through the work that's been done in defining it in the DSM? And is that different than looking at it from this angle of saying safe levels of gambling?
Yeah, I mean, the focus for so many years in my field of work has been on people who get into trouble. And very relatively little attention has been paid on the many, many people who don't get into trouble with gambling and what it is that they're doing, whether it's, budgeting ahead of time or not taking their credit cards or, whatever it is that they're doing. We know very little about how people sort of maintain a level of gambling, even if it's a very high level of gambling, without sort of tipping over into having the loss of control and the harmful consequences. So I think that's sort of where our interest was in. Although I take your point and agree that from a regulatory perspective, it's very important to understand what those unsafe levels are.
Well,
If you can, I just, for the record, I want to say I'm a little skeptical about this question just in general. I mean, there's a big difference between the influence of the effect of nicotine on your body and the effect of gambling. And, just leave it at that. But I think it's great to be able to try to ask the question, but for the sake of the record, I'm a little skeptical about what anybody would be able to come up, no matter which way you come at the question.
I think it's something that we're going to probably be wrestling with, as we move forward. And when you start a project like this, you have your set of research questions, and a year or 2 or 4 years in, you have to look at your research questions and say, well, we were able to answer 1, 2, 3, but not 4. And then the question becomes, what do we need to do if we want to answer 4?
Or what's 5 and 6, too?
Or 5 and 6, too.
Right.
Okay, I'm mindful of the time, so. This sort of flipped, there we go. So taking the findings from the research questions, this is just to give you an idea of how we think what we're going to learn from MAGIC can be applied. Targeting resources, of course, is very important. Knowing the number of new problem gamblers will let us estimate need for services across the state. We'll be better able to target prevention campaigns and develop interventions, and perhaps develop some guidelines for awareness and prevention. Okay, next. So now that you have we have a shared understanding of some of the key terms, and you've all become public health professionals, Domini, I want to briefly describe the research methods that we're going to be using for the MAGIC cohort study. Oh, we lost our color. Oh well. there was some nice graphics. You can probably see it on the slides in your packet. So the cohort for MAGIC, as I indicated, is going to be pulled from the baseline population survey for SIGMA. This is key both because it gives us a clear baseline for these individuals, and also because SIGMA, the baseline survey, is a representative sample of the Massachusetts population. So from our sort of SIGMA baseline sample, which is about 10,000 people, we're going to take a random sample of 1,300 of them. Out of the remaining 8,700 or so, we're going to identify those at highest risk. We're basically going to take everybody and rank them in terms of risk, and we're going to take the top 1,300. The study is going to follow both the general population sample and the high-risk sample over the entire course of the study to see how each of the two groups changes over time.
Oh, so the first 13 is almost like the control group, I guess?
Yes, so if we can go to the next slide, that's exactly what we've
Right.
got. Each of the samples has a very important purpose. The general subsample, the general population subsample, as I said, is going to be randomly drawn and will be representative of Massachusetts. We're going to use this group to calculate incidence because it is representative of the population, but we're also going to use them to examine the development of gambling problems among a small number of people who don't have high levels of risk at baseline. There are going to be a few like that, but not many. And then we're going to look at, in this group, we're going to look at the impact of gambling availability on things besides gambling problems. So things like attitudes, things like, other disorders, their recreational activities, things like that. We're going to actually have a lot of other information from them besides just their gambling participation and problem gambling.
Rachel, one of the key things about Sigma was some of the analysis that you would do in proximity to the operations, the targeted samples. How do they relate or not at all to the
We're not going to be able
to
to
samples
draw
here?
from the targeted samples because they are not representative of the state. So if
Right.
we were to add them into the mix that we would draw from, it would no longer be a sample that was representative of the full state of Massachusetts. It could be, it would be a sample that was representative of mostly of Massachusetts, but then maybe just of Plainville and its surrounding communities, or Springfield and its surrounding communities.
Right. So the 10,000, the targeted sample is a subgroup of the 10,000, but may or may not be, is not a subset of the 1,300 of either one.
1,300?
Wait,
Yes.
Can we go back? Okay, so we're going to take the full baseline population survey.
Yeah.
We're going to draw 1,300 of them just
Randomly.
from the full sample.
So somebody in that 1,300 may be in a targeted sample or may not.
No, they will not be in a targeted sample.
There will
because
not.
That's a separate, we have another 1,100 people that we surveyed in Plainville and the surrounding communities, but we are not adding them into the pool for Magic. Because if we do that, the sample will no longer be representative of Massachusetts. It'll be with this much heavier representation of people from Plainville and surrounding communities.
Okay. I'll follow up
In-
later.
In the random sample, there are going to be some who are at high risk.
Yes,
And so the 1,300 at high risk, all in the second sample, all of them will be at high risk,
correct.
will be joined in terms of risk by some of those in the random sample.
Yes.
So does that affect the utility of the random sample as a control group?
No, we would expect to find a small number of people in the random sample or in the general population
Right.
subsample
Right.
that would have gambling problems or would be at high risk for transitioning to a gambling
Right.
problem. The challenge in a cohort study of this kind is that that's going to be a very small number. We anticipate perhaps 50 of that 1,300 would be either already a problem gambler or gambling at levels that suggest that they're at high risk. 50 people is not enough. It's not worth following just 50 people over time because not enough of them are going to be there to even tell you, to give you any kind of like difference between men and women, for example, or between,
Right.
Different racial and ethnic groups.
No, I
So-
understand that. You couldn't follow the 50 people, so you need the group of high-risk people. I understand
Right.
that, but
You need
does-
to, you need to get enough people into the cohort who you anticipate will become problem gamblers to be able to see them do that and to see what happens.
No, I understand that. I was just wondering whether the incident, whether the number of but high-risk people in the random sample overrepresented in the overall study, the number of people at high risk.
It won't it will be representative of the rate of people at high risk in the population, because it'll be a random sample
Yeah,
from the
okay.
population.
All right, okay. So you measure the results from the random that we know include some high-risk people,
Right,
the incidence in that pool and the incidence in the high-risk pool. I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
okay.
So am I right in it's saying you're actually doing two cohort studies?
No, it's, no.
Well, it's.
You've got two 1,300-person cohorts that you're going to be
Yeah, but
tracking
they're
independently.
sort of interrelated in important ways, because you need both of them to be able to answer the two questions that we have,
Right.
that
you
actually
have-
the
right.
commission
One
posed.
study with two pools.
You have
in the
one
request for
cohort to study incidence and one cohort to study etiology.
Yeah.
Two cohorts.
Okay, let's see, did I finish all of my points on here? So I just want to make the one additional point on this slide of the general population sample. I've already mentioned we're going to use them for a number of purposes, but we're also going to use them as a kind of control group for our high-risk sample. And this is particularly important because we're going to be looking at them over a substantial period of time, and they're going to be aging as they go along, so we need to be able to see from this representative of the population group, what aging does to them, and then be able to control for that in our high-risk group. The high-risk sample is not representative of Massachusetts, but will include a large number of people who we expect will become problem gamblers over the course of the study. We expect it to be about 180 to 200 of the high-risk sample will actually become problem gamblers over the course of the study. And that's enough to be able to develop a comprehensive etiological model, looking at the high likelihood that there will be several different problem gambling subgroups that will have different trajectories, and the relative importance of sort of those groups in terms of the total problem gambling population, if you will. Next. This is something that we're going to be talking about in great detail next week when we have the full Sigma team is coming together, and then we're going to spend a day working on magic issues. This is what we have right now in terms of the timing of our assessments. Wave 1, as I've indicated, is already in the bag. We're out of the field, thank goodness, with our full sample. Wave 2, we're anticipating launching in the very near future. It replicates the baseline survey, so that's why we'll be able to get out of the box pretty quickly. We're using the exact same interview that we used in the baseline survey, and we're going to be giving them the opportunity, as we did in the baseline, to complete online or through a self-administered questionnaire or by telephone. Wave 3, which we anticipate launching, at this point we anticipate launching in September of 2015, is going to include 2 changes to our methodology. First, we're going to increase the length of the questionnaire to include additional questions about important variables that we're not able to measure in full depth in the baseline or the first 2 waves. And then second of all, we're going to eliminate the telephone and self-administered modalities. We're going to make things much less complicated by having everyone complete online. They're going to be able to complete online at home or at a publicly available location, like my favorite library in Northampton, or at one of 2 regional offices that we're going to maintain over the period of the study. Wave 4 and subsequently, we plan to launch in September each year using the sort of new methodology or new method for data collection that I just outlined for you. Next.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Just, so you have 1,300 people. What's your experience and just with how many people will stay with something like this year after year? Or, you know, is there a percentage, just kind of a ballpark with these studies?
Yes, attrition is a huge
Okay,
issue
I
with
thought so.
cohort studies.
Mhm.
And retention, which is our next slide, retention is very, very important because when you lose someone from your cohort study, you don't lose just them, you lose all of the information that you have from them from before. So it becomes a real challenge to your ability to analyze the data if if your attrition rate is high. I guess what I'll say here is that there are a lot of things that we have learned that you can do to keep people in a study like this.
You incentivize them?
You incentivize them, of course. You conduct your assessment at the same time.
Maybe
every year.
give them free play.
I don't think we're going there, Chairman. You maintain contact between assessments. You have multiple means for them to contact the project. One of the most important things is to have an easily remembered brand, which is why I came up with our magic brand very early on. Maintain a website. All of these things are things that we're going to be doing. And I can tell you that Rob Williams, who is one of my co-investigators on this, the longitudinal study that he completed last year or the year before in Ontario, they had a 94% retention rate.
Over how many years?
Over 5 years.
5 years.
The right people to recruit and maintain.
Right.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a lot of things that you can do. And the good news is that we have a lot of experience. Between ourselves, Rob and I have been deeply involved in 4 very large cohort studies around the world. So we've got some pretty strong ideas about what we're going to be able to do. We think that, well, I don't know. I mean, we'll sort of see as we go along, but our hope is to have no less than 1,100 of those 1,300 people in each of those groups at the end of the first 5 years of the cohort. Next.
Rachel, help me understand that, go back to that previous screen, that
retention.
4th bullet, maintaining contact between assessments.
Sending birthday cards, sending all the things that your operators are planning to do for their player loyalty programs. That's what we're going to do for our guys too.
Oh.
Rachel, there was, I think it was
Except loyalty points, they don't get loyalty points.
the study that was led by Rob Williams that had such a high retention rate. You had mentioned a few of the things that they had done that I thought was really unique and hopefully transferable to Massachusetts. Can you tell the commission what those were? It was, there was something about using recruiting retired individuals to call and ask how
Yes,
people are doing and to kind of show concern.
Rob actually incentivized not just his respondents, but also his interviewers.
Right.
So the point that he's made several times, many times to me because we talk regularly, is you have to have really dedicated long-term staff. I mean, you have to have people working on the project who are really, really into it. And what Rob did with his longitudinal study in Ontario was he hired 3 recently retired folks who basically, he paid them extra if they were able to make contact and complete interviews with people. So he incentivized them, but they also, they went above and beyond. You know, they would sit with somebody who wasn't very comfortable with an online or a computer literate person, and they would help them, you know, complete the interview.
Thank you again, Bob.
So, but yeah, it's very, very important to have continuity with your personnel on this, on, you know, people on the team. I'm really excited about the fact that we've got all of the people that, most of the people that are on the full-time staff for Sigma are going to be spread, so we're going to split their time across Sigma and Magic. And I think that's going to give us a lot of not just continuity with the two, within the two projects, but continuity and synergy across the two projects.
But the staff kind of, help me understand this, the staff are research staff, but they can kind of quickly become a social worker or a case manager or something
Customer
like
service
that
rep.
if they're maintaining this constant contact.
Yeah, I mean, we had this with the baseline survey as well, where the letter that people got inviting them to participate actually had our project manager's name and phone number on it. And so Amanda would come in every morning, especially after a new batch of sample had been released, and there'd be 4 or 5 phone calls for her from people going, what is this thing, and why am I supposed, and why did it come to my house, and how did you get me? And so we had a lot of discussions about, you know, how do you handle these people, and what can you do to sort of encourage them to participate.
But I mean, maybe it's just me, I can kind of see as the relationship goes forward of, you know, I call Mark on his birthday and Mark's not having a very good day, and now all of a sudden, I'm not really a researcher, am I?
Well, there's typically what we do with the interviewers is we script for them. So, you know, if we probably would not have someone calling Mark up on his birthday if I don't think we would let him be a participant in the survey anyway, but or in the study. But you know, assuming that he was, I don't think we would call him. I think we would probably send him an email or a birthday card. You know, something that wouldn't entail, you know, finding out about his love life on the phone.
Well, no. The point I'm getting at is, you know, you're creating relationship, especially with that target population of 1,300 people. And, you know, as we see through conversations we have with Marlene and her group, you know, that one contact, you know, where they turn back to the researcher who might be innocently calling and getting an update or asking a question or what have you, that the call evolves into something different.
We're going to be very careful to have most of that contact be with the people at NORC who are actually doing the data collection.
Okay.
Okay, I'm very aware that you've had a long day, so I want to just quickly go through these last few slides. Yeah. Okay, so just to give you an idea, there actually have been quite a few small-scale cohort studies of gambling and problem gambling that have been done. I think at least 10 to 15 small-scale studies, starting probably in the 1990s. And while these studies have provided very helpful information, they each have one or more of the limitations that I've listed here, and because of these limitations, none of these existing small-scale studies are really large enough to be able to figure out either incidence or to generate a comprehensive etiological model of problem gambling. Next slide. Partly as a consequence of all of these small-scale studies not being able to answer the questions that people had, there were 4 jurisdictions internationally that elected to go forward with much larger scale cohort studies. The 3 jurisdictions are Alberta, Canada, Ontario, Canada, Sweden, and Australia. Rob Williams was a PI or a co-PI on the Alberta and Ontario studies, and I actually have been deeply involved in the Swedish and Victorian studies. These studies were extremely helpful in identifying variables that predict recovery, relapse, and occurrence of new gambling problems, but they also had a number of limitations. And those limitations made it very, very difficult to create a robust etiological model. And it's based on the knowledge that we gained from our involvement with those studies that we proposed the design that we've proposed for MAGIC, with this much larger proportion of people who will be deemed at high risk for developing a problem.
What's insufficient oversampling mean?
Insufficient oversampling means that we didn't get enough people who became problem gamblers in any of those studies to be able to have a full sort of, to be able to look at subgroups of people who developed problems to see if there were different trajectories.
You didn't have the second 1,300.
Well,
It's a high risk, people.
yeah, it's those insufficient sampling of high-risk people. So in
I see. Okay.
Alberta,
Yeah.
for example, they had 29% of their sample was at high risk.
Okay.
All of these big studies oversampled for high-risk people. They each did it in a different way, and none of them ended up with enough high-risk people. So what we did was we went back to the 2 Canadian studies, and we actually looked at what were the predictors for people transitioning into a problem, and that was the basis for our selection criteria.
For the 1,300 at high risk?
High risk,
Okay.
yes.
Got it.
Okay.
What is the short duration here? 4 to 6 years? Is that a limitation? I'm gonna ask this question later on as well, as in the budget
Okay.
notion.
Right. So 4 to 6 years, all of these studies have been completed, and there's no new data collection that's going on. Well, all right, except Sweden is still continuing. But what happens is, over the course of 4, 5, or 6 years, you're getting people who, you're only going to get people who develop a problem in that period of time. And when we look at the broader addiction literature, only about 50% of people who develop an addiction, whether it's to alcohol or drugs or those are the 2 main ones, only about 50% of people who develop an addiction over a period of time do it within 4 to 6 years. If you extend the study to 10 years, you capture about 90% of the people who develop a problem. And the key difference is that you're getting people, if you extend the length of the study, you're going to get people whose gambling, may not be problematic for quite a long time, and then may become problematic sort of years after they became involved with gambling. And you're not going to catch those people if you end the study after 5 years.
Okay?
Okay? Next. Turn the page too soon. So I just want to close by saying how very, very exceptional the full research agenda is that this commission has created. The reality is that nothing on the scale of the Massachusetts Gambling Impact Cohort Study has been done anywhere in the United States, and I would venture to say anywhere in the world. So once again, you are pioneers in the gambling research field. It's also important to note that in all of the jurisdictions where we have done these large-scale cohort studies, casino gambling had already been operating for quite a few years. And what we're going to have here in Massachusetts is the ability to look at our study participants over the course of a very dynamic change within the state of Massachusetts. Now, that's not to say that some of these people aren't already gambling elsewhere, at casinos in Connecticut or in Rhode Island or in New York or Atlantic City or Vegas.
Or the lottery,
Sorry?
or the lottery.
Or the lottery, or all of the above. But they will not be gambling at a casino in close proximity or in as close proximity to them as here in Massachusetts. And this is going to be an opportunity for us to understand much more clearly and much more precisely the role of increased availability in the development of a gambling problem. And finally, I guess what I'd like to say is that we think there's great value, and we are just completely thrilled to be able to be adding magic to Sigma and be able to carry them out under the same umbrella. We think that the two studies happening at the same time and being done by the same team is going to be very synergistic. We're going to be able to compare findings from the two cornerstones of your research agenda, and we'll be able to use the results from each of the studies to explore concepts within the other study more thoroughly. So we think this is just a great opportunity, and we are really, really excited.
Comments? Thoughts? Thank you.
Thank you very
Rachel.
much.
It's very exciting.
And that was my last slide, too.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
It's,
Thank you.
It's really fascinating and really
is
really
fascinating.
exciting, and can't wait. Next up.
Okay, great. Next is my recommendation to launch the cohort study. If I could just recap kind of where we have been with this process of procuring this. In October of last year, October 2013, actually October 21st, 2013, you, the commissioners, with the advice of the Gaming Research Advisory Committee, the Gaming Policy Advisory Committee, voted and unanimously approved to add a longitudinal cohort study of gambling behavior to the research agenda. We went through a procurement process from November 2013 through March of 2013, and at the end of that time, an evaluation committee, including myself, selected UMass Amherst as the group that had the best proposal. I brought that before the commission on April 3rd of 2014, and again, there was unanimous approval to accept that proposal, but there was a direction to delay the launch of the study until a later date in 2014, which is why it's coming back before you right now. Rachel kind of went through what are the merits of the study. I think did a fantastic job. The only thing that I could add is I think that the Expanded Gaming Act has a lot to offer. And one of the pieces that I don't think always gets the most attention is the contribution of research, not just in terms of what it will provide to Massachusetts and how it will inform the use of the Public Health Trust Fund, but to the field in general. There's a great opportunity here to advance information, knowledge that can make a real difference in terms of how do we prevent gambling disorders, how do we promote responsible gaming, and how do we provide the best possible treatment that we possibly can. I cannot underestimate or cannot understate how important that is. This doesn't come without a cost, and I see this as the second cornerstone of the research agenda. The first obviously being SIGMA, the social and economic impacts of gaming in Massachusetts. This being the second as a cohort study. Dr. Volberg had expressed how the two relate together and what we will gain from each of them. On the second page, before you can see what the cost is projected to be with a launch date of December 1st, 2014 for the remainder of the fiscal year. You can see what the estimated amount is for fiscal year 2016. Between the 2 years, we're looking at approximately a $2.1 million expense for the commission to have this cohort study. There's obviously an additional expense of that moving forward and beyond. As we discussed, the longer as long as we can keep, retain the cohort, as long as we can keep that going, the richer the information ultimately ends up becoming. So with that, I propose that we continue with this steadfast commitment to research and having programs, services, information that is research-based and evidence-based. And therefore, I recommend that we authorize University of Massachusetts Amherst to begin the longitudinal cohort study of gambling behavior in Massachusetts, better known as MAGIC, and that we move forward.
Okay, two questions I have. The FY16 figures are likely to be in the ballpark of the figures for future years, right?
Actually, as I understand it, the number goes down, and it would be closer to year one, that there is a lot of expenses. Actually, the amount that we have budgeted in fiscal year 2015 is slightly lower than what we have budgeted. This is lower than what we have budgeted in 2015, and that's partly because of a later start date that gets bumped to 2016. And so we see a higher cost in 2016 in a large part because some of the expenses in 15 got bumped.
All right, so say there's a decrease of some significance. I guess the point that I'm trying to get to is that doing this for 2 years really doesn't yield anything.
Correct.
Right? So if we spend the $2 million to get any value, we're really talking about a 5-year commitment, say.
Correct.
Right? And maybe longer. But a minimum of about 5 years. Right?
Yes. And if I recall, the proposal that we had received had projected that the ongoing expense of this on an annual basis would be somewhere in the ballpark of what we have budgeted in the first year, so right around $950,000.
So around $900,000 for 5 years. And I recognize these are ballpark figures. I just wanted to make sure that we're all aware of what we're doing here. So it's not just this, it is a commitment.
Correct.
Now, my second question is, and maybe this is not for you, there's now, or will be shortly, about $10 million, 9.5, I think, in the Public Health Trust Fund. Does this come out of the Public Health Trust Fund?
There's 9.5 million in the Public Health Trust Fund, when's that?
Out of the 85 million,
Right, out of the 170 million.
170 million.
Well, actually,
Public
I used 195.
Is Public Health Trust Fund one of the recipients?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
195 at 5% is 9.5, and so, and I used the 25 from Penn.
But it's 5% of operating GGR. It's not, it's,
No, it's 5%, as I read the statute, 5% of the license fees,
Licensing fund. Do you
licensing
remember that
fund,
figure?
5%, 100% of the licensing fund goes into this, whatever it's called.
I'd have to check that figure. There's a 5 million assessment that we make.
No, that's the $5 million annual assessment.
And the bulk of the Public Health Trust Fund that I recall comes from Category 1 licensing fee, GGRs, taxes, the 25%. It's 5% of the 25.
Section 59 is the fund into which, describes the fund into which the money from the licensing fees goes. Section 59K says that 5% of those monies go to the Public Health Trust Fund.
okay. That sounds conclusive. I didn't realize that.
And if we take the, but I'm not contradicted here, and we have to check. But
Yeah, we'd have to check, but
This is the gross gaming revenue.
Yeah, but earlier on, when it talks about the license fees, it says they go put into the 59, Section 59 fund.
Okay.
And it's the ongoing monies that go into the, 5% goes into that public health trust fund, plus the $5 million, unless there's two public health trust funds. Anyway, there is a
Look it up.
public health trust fund into
Yep.
which 5% of the licensing fees go. So, okay. But that, I raised that because that is, I heard earlier us talking about the assessments for next year and want to at least ensure that we recognize this may not be something that we have to use the assessments for.
We'll definitely check that, and that was always my intention, to use all things research, prevention, outreach, etc., from the Public Health Trust Fund. As you know, that is the secretary and the chair have the executive committee
Right.
MOU to use those monies, but
Okay.
if that's the case, we can obviously adjust those assessments.
Any further discussion about the proposal?
In the line item, obviously, the biggest chunk of money goes into, sorry, I lost it, I think it's subcontracts.
Correct. The
You just give me,
bulk of it is NORC, and they are the subcontract to this that does the survey piece of it.
The data collection.
The data collection. And that's a bulk of it. The other piece is, there's a co-principal investigator, Rob Williams, that is paid through a subcontract.
indirect costs? Indirect costs.
And, I'm sorry?
What are the indirect?
Rachel, do you want to address
Yeah,
indirect?
that's the overhead that the University of Massachusetts charges as a state agency.
I believe that indirect is 7% of everything but subcontracts and the first $25,000 of subcontracts.
Right, so the 26% is only applied to the first 25,000 of each subcontract.
Can't get it. Got the act, I can't search. All right, any other discussion before we bring this to a vote? Commissioner Zuniga?
Sure. No, I think this is very exciting. As described here, it's also a big commitment, as also discussed here. But I would move that the Commission approves the recommendation put forward before us, and issue a notice to proceed to the team from UMass to start the MAGIC cohort study.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion to proceed with the MAGIC cohort study, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Is there anything, Jim, that you want to make sure you get with the last three items? You probably don't get them all, but, okay. All right.
I'm ready.
Director
Wells.
Wells, you're here.
Bam.
Go for it.
On the agenda this afternoon are the results of the suitability investigation for an additional Penn National qualifier, Lance Matthew George. And Mr. George has been patiently waiting all day. He is here this afternoon. On May of
Hope we
2000.
don't disappoint him.
Yeah. I told him this
Yeah.
would be brief, so. In May of 2014, Mr. George was appointed to by Penn National Gaming to be Vice President and General Manager of the Plainridge Park Casino in Plainville, Massachusetts. In that capacity, he is overseeing the facility, is currently heavily involved in the current project construction. As a result of this appointment, he was identified to be an individual qualifier for the Springfield Gaming LLC, the Penn National license. And in addition, he'll also be a key gaming employee executive. This report and suitability determination covers both categories. Because Penn National expects to open that casino in approximately 7 or 8 months, we made the decision in conjunction with them to go forward with the key gaming employee executive license as well for him. Mr. George submitted all the required forms and supplemental document requests to the IEB, and our investigators conducted a rigorous background check, as I have stated on numerous occasions before. Areas covered include the employment history, criminal record, education, directorships and shareholder interests, civil litigation, bankruptcies, property ownership, political contributions, references, media coverage. Investigators also conducted a financial responsibility evaluation on Mr. George with positive results. Mr. George attended the University of New Hampshire, where he was awarded a Bachelor of Arts in Communication. He graduated, 1995? Thank you. You'll see also in the appendix to the report, there's a listing on his employment history. Mr. George is someone that worked his way up in the casino industry. He started in 1995 at the Turning Stone Resort and Casino as a cage cashier. He then worked, that's in New York. He then worked at the Belterra Casino Resort and Spa in Indiana as a database analyst, database marketing supervisor. He then moved on to the Boomtown Hotel and Casino in Louisiana, where he was a database manager. That was from 2004 to 2006. He then was in the L'Auberge du La Casino Resort in from Pinnacle Entertainment Incorporated in Louisiana as well. He was the director of database marketing from January of 2006 to October of 2006. He then returned to the Boomtown Casino in Louisiana from October of 2006 to December of 2007 as the director of marketing. Then worked at the Pinnacle Entertainment in Nevada as the director of relationship marketing from 2008 to 2009. Returned to the Boomtown Casino from 2009 to 2011, where he became the vice president and general manager. He then worked at the Argosy Casino in Iowa from 2011 to 2014 as the vice president and general manager before being appointed to the position he now holds with Penn National Gaming. Mr. George has been licensed or registered to participate in some form of gaming in 4 jurisdictions. A check with Iowa, Louisiana, Indiana, and New York confirmed the following licenses and certifications and their statuses. The Iowa Racing Gaming Commission, he had a gaming license that's currently active. He was given that in 2011, and that expires in 2014. The Louisiana Gaming Control Board gave him a gaming license in 2004. That is expired. His Indiana Gaming Commission, he has a gaming license. That is also expired. And the New York State Racing and Wagering Board gave him a license in 1995. That's currently inactive. All of Mr. George's licenses were in good standing, and all jurisdictions reported no derogatory information related to Mr. George's licensure. There were no significant investigative issues uncovered relative to Mr. George's application for licensure and suitability. Overall, Mr. George has demonstrated by clear and convincing evidence that he's suitable for licensure in Massachusetts, and therefore the IEB is recommending that the commission find him suitable, no conditions.
I also understand he's our first key gaming executive
correct.
licensee, which
That is
is
correct.
another milestone for us to
Yep.
hit. Maybe not for him, but it is for us.
Yeah,
So we'll call you 001.
yeah, 001.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
No, I looked at the report. It's thorough and, as usual, and absolutely no issues arise.
Yeah.
I would agree that it's a very clean investigation report, and I would move that we approve Mr. George for suitability.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
And
Congratulations.
just so the record is clear, that's for both licenses, correct?
Correct.
For the suitability qualifier and the key gaming employee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify something as we're switching speakers, and that is my thoughts about the Public Health Trust Fund being available to pay the magic study were wrong. They're not available. It's an assessment that we'll use.
Congratulations, Mr. George.
Yeah. Mr. Glennon, our CIO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm here to talk about security today. I want to thank Compass IT Compliance LLC, especially Jonathan Hughes, who did the heavy lifting in pulling together the 9 policies you have before you. I want to also thank CFAO Lennon for handling the engagement with Compass IT and Maria Patera from Derek's staff for working on the policy development team. Thanks to Kevin Burns, the Commonwealth's Chief Information Security Officer, and his staff. Not only did they review these policies, but we adopt by reference many of the Commonwealth security policies which are based on the government's best practices. Of all the deterrents that folks in the security field have to combat the persistent daily threats, an educated user community is one of the best defenses. MGC will be working with Kevin and his team to provide awareness training in the first quarter of calendar year 2015. In your packet, you have a series of 9 policies for your review and approval. Access control policy, business continuity management policy, communications and operations management policy, information security policy, IT acquisition security policy, IT asset and risk management policy, physical and environmental security policy, point of interaction device policy, and a security incident response policy. These policies are a necessary component of the controls that need to be put in place to meet payment card industry PCI guidelines. I want to note that this morning, as a part of the MGC policy manual that you approved, the information technology user policy, which covers much of the individual responsibility that every MGC staff member has for responsible use of information technology assets, was included in that. So that's a separate policy that we have written long before these other ones. During the internal and external review process, a number of thoughtful comments were submitted that I want to briefly discuss. In the access control policy, one of the questions was related to level of access. How do people know what levels of access they have? Right now, we pretty much have a consistent level of access for everybody to email and systems. We have some folders on our shared drive which are secured based on units. But as we go forward, we will have multiple levels of access in the licensing management system. There'll be administrative and there'll be roles and responsibilities. And we will let people know what their level of access is, and it will be handled through an HR process from the beginning, from the onboarding. We'll set up a profile. What should that person have access to? If that changes, there'll be an approval process, and then, of course, when somebody leaves the commission, the rights and credentials would be revoked for those systems. The second question was related to thumb drives and virus protection, and the information user policy covers issues of use of portable devices, data in motion, and things like that. We are very conscious of the issues related to a thumb drive and the vulnerability of a device being put into the network and possibly infecting it with viruses. So the user policy covers that issue. That was one of the questions that came out. And then the policy related to point of interaction devices is specific to the devices that we use to interface with the credit card industry. And it's very prescriptive in terms of the actual physical device. At this point, I would entertain any questions and ask for your approval of the policies in the packet pending any changes or modifications.
Questions?
Are we going to have some kind of a training or something exercise so that people understand what they need to know about these policies?
Yeah, so I think as a part of the training that Rick mentioned this morning for the HR manual, we've got over 100 policies. Again, security policies, it's our best weapon for people to be aware. So yes, the answer is yes. We will have a security-specific training.
And these two will live on the internet, intranet?
all the policies, yes, these policies, along with the one this morning, will be on the internet for people to reference. I think it's important to note that policy is only as good as how it's used. These are not made for shelfware. They really do need to be understood by people, especially when it comes to escalation of incidents, because if we do have anomalies or something that happens to our users, it's important they report it, because when in aggregate, these are the type of things that security people look for in order to do trending and to find out about vulnerabilities and threats. So we will work very hard to educate MGC users, our staff.
Are these state policies as well? Did you model them after anything from ITD, John, or?
So, again, a lot of these policies in here have links, and we adopt by reference the Mass IT policies, which are comprehensive and based on best practices for government entities. So we really did, in our work with Compass, we exposed the Commonwealth's policies, and we said we want to look to these first, and then any deviation would obviously have to be justified, because the Commonwealth has a comprehensive set of security policies and practices.
I was interested, what is unique to MGC? What deviation from ITD?
I think just the specifics around the management of information, how we manage information relative to the payment card industry, how do we take information in, how do we protect it? It's pretty standard operating procedure. I would say these are pretty boilerplate for compliance for PCI audit.
Anybody else? Do we have a motion to adopt? Commissioner Zuniga, is this you?
Sure. I would move that we adopt the policies, the information technology policies as presented here today in the packet.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to do it? Yeah. Director Acosta and Director Glennon.
Come on up, David. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Director Acosta and I wanted to provide you with a status update on the licensing management system project. I want to acknowledge the hard work and effort of those involved, Director Acosta and his team, Investigation and Enforcement Bureau Director Wells, and Detective Lieutenant Brian Connors, the IEB staff and the troopers, and our integration partner NTT Data, as well as software vendor EMC, whose Documentum product is the enterprise content platform for the LMS system. The first, can you just go to the first chart? The first chart is just an example to show that in the software development lifecycle, if you specify the requirements for what you're going to build early on and define them during the concept and design, there is a much lower cost than if you change after you've gone down the road. And I think what we're going to talk about a little bit today is the fact we were impacted by change late in the process. Next slide, please. So this slide depicts three timelines. The original timeline for the project, which was started in December of 2013. We expected to finish our deployment in June. In March of this year, we executed a change order to account for changes in requirements, and also MGC's failing to deliver a development environment as we had committed to in the statement of work. And then in the ensuing months, a number of factors have contributed to additional delays in the development lifecycle. We requested additional changes. We also experienced some issues with the platform, the newest version of the EMC platform. When the development team went to move from one version to another, there was some problems with porting that caused delays. All of this contributed to a delay totaling on the project about 21 weeks. And we negotiated with NTT Data, and we agreed to split the cost of this. Not a small dollar amount, but it was, some of the change was our fault, and some of the change was risk in the platform that we had, we had undertaken. So I think it was a fair outcome. We're on track now to launch live internally on the 24th of November. And if you go to the next chart, please. These are the milestones which we now have before us. The team, IEB and licensing, are now doing user acceptance testing. In the second phase of that, it's really beating on the system on all paths that could be taken, looking for bugs, and NTT is remediating. Again, our internal launch date is the 24th, which will start a 90-day warranty period, under which we will continue to identify any problems, and NTT is obligated to fix those. At some point during that 90 days, we will expose the application externally to allow our people that want to apply for licenses, both businesses and constituents, to use it. And I think that it really depends on our ability to handle the support that will be required to help those individuals to use the licensing management system. So again, I think, mixed news. I would say in terms of project management, there was some accountability and mistakes made on both sides in terms of notification and the obligation to notify us in a timely manner that there was going to be an increase in cost. And I personally take some accountability for that. I think it's shared with our vendor. But I think we have a way forward. And I don't know, Director Acosta, if you have anything to add to that, other than you're much closer to the testing and what's going on in these days than I am. So
I don't know if I
Can I-
could explain this
go
more
ahead.
eloquently than the director just did. We're currently in the middle of testing, and hopefully we start going live internally in another 2 weeks.
Well, you had a lot of user testing going on last night, I know. Have you had feedback on how it's going?
There's a number of bugs that has been discovered, and as they're being discovered, they're being addressed by the technical folks in the office. There's a number of people. We've already have identified several staff members that are what we refer to as high-end users, because they've become quite proficient with the software. There's still some things that need to be fixed. Hopefully they'll be addressed by the 24th.
I would also say that we have the opportunity, because we are rolling this out internally, to, if there is something we can put off to a subsequent build. So once we go live, we'll continue to identify defects in the software that we will fix, and probably issue new releases of the software every 2 weeks or so. So there may be some things that we choose to postpone into that warranty period in order to go live on the 24th and begin using a production instance. That's the word that I got from the NTT team today. So they did find some problems, but there's nothing that's a showstopper. Okay, I asked specifically. I said, I'm going before the commission. I'm reporting out. Is there anything that you see that would cause us not to be able to go live on the 24th? And there was nothing given. So I fully expect us to start using it internally on the 24th. And I continue to fix problems, because no application is error-free on day one.
So by using it internally, you mean we're going to get the applications and other things on a paper form. We're going to do the data entry internally, and then when we make it public-facing, we can get it directly from the applicant through the system.
Yeah, so we're essentially going to use the workflow, and we're going to take the responsibility for committing the documents into the system initially. Yes, that's true.
I had a question about your statement. MGC failed to deliver the design requirements as promised. That's a strong statement
So
without an explanation.
Yeah, so we had a consultant who we had engaged and was on board when I started last year, and he had committed to build the initial environment that NTT would use, the initial Documentum environment, to start the development. and that was Jonathan Russell, okay? And Jonathan was, for whatever reason, unable to deliver on that commitment, and so there was part of the statement of work that we signed with NTT to have that environment available, and we, prior to the date, failed to deliver it. When we fixed it, we built an environment, and we were able to move on. But this was an issue that we addressed back in March, our inability to provide the environment that we had committed to.
We started with this effort on a roughly $1 million effort, but it included also a document management system piece that has now been put a little bit for a later date. Is that correct?
So the Documentum Foundation is a platform on which we can do document management, and we're going to build out that capability on that platform. And we're looking at the smaller projects. There are actually 3 of them we're looking at right now. One is the HR piece and handling onboarding and the applicant process. Yes, sorry, Commissioner.
When we approved this project at $1 million, what was the scope?
The foundational hardware, the foundational software, an enterprise content management platform, and the engagement of a system integration vendor to build a licensing management system.
And so now that engagement has put us twice, or double the amount that we initially projected. Only the engagement, which was a subset of the $1 million, is now costing us another $1 million? Is that what I'm reading here correctly?
No, I don't think that's correct. I think the incremental, can you go to the next slide, please?
It's costing us $540, it's costing NTT $500.
Right, so our full investment for phase 1 is, I'm sorry, I don't have my reading glasses.
540?
Yes, so there is an incremental cost due to the changes and the problems that we've encountered of $600,000. That's correct. To us.
Right.
To complete all of the requirements in phase 1,
And
which again have changed since when we signed the deal. The $940,000 did not take into account the changes and the problems that we ran into. So the incremental costs were changes that we made because of changes to the forms, changes to the business processes. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of them was a checklist that the investigations of the IEB decided that they wanted to add because licensing had added a checklist. It was a function that made sense. It was added late in the process. It cost 3 weeks at whatever the burn rate was. So, I mean,
I'm curious about phase 2, because where are we in phase 2 relative to this ideal time for change and worst time for change graph?
So I think for phase 2, we're going to evaluate whether, what our course of forward is. Are we going to continue to partner with NTT, or are we going to rely on internal resources to build some of the smaller functionality out? And I think that's a conversation I have to have with Director Day and Director Lennon about what the most efficient way to do that is. I'm hiring staff to be able to manage this environment, and hopefully we'll be able to, definitely we'll be able to maintain what NTT built, and hopefully we'll be able to build out on our own some of the future functionality. And now, having said that, we're still going to work with NTT to take the additional functionality, which is not in the system now, that we're going to require, and figure out what the effort is to build that.
What is that functionality that doesn't exist?
So it would be things like hearings. The hearing process is not built in. I think there's racing division forms is not a component of this. I think there is some functionality which we were unable to put in because of the cost. We left it off the table. We parking lotted it and left it to phase 2.
So functionality that was originally part of the $1 million we've put off.
No, it was not part of the $1 million. The hearings piece and correct me if I'm wrong here, David, but
Racing was not.
Racing was not, the hearings piece was not, appeals was not. Those business processes were not part of the original engagement and statement of work.
So what lessons did we learn relative to this, to project managing to a budget?
I think what we learned is you can't make changes late in the process, and you need to build in a buffer for unexpected technical problems which could occur during the course of a project. I think we estimated this tightly.
Can we start applying those to phase 2 and start a real conversation on scope? I, for one, would like to understand what that scope is before we make the next commitment.
Absolutely, and I believe that conversation has already taken place between myself and NTT.
Well, carbon copy me, please.
But he wanted to, Commissioner Zuniga would like to be a part of that conversation.
Absolutely, Commissioner.
Anything else? Anybody? I know we don't have any formal action to take.
No.
Right. Okay.
Well, don't we approve all financial commitments?
The total dollar amount was covered in the budget item that was approved for the project. So in my conversations with CFAO Lennon, the 1.5 is covered in the budget.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all we have for formal items. Anything else anybody has on their mind? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
All right.
All right. Thank you all very much.